So, Aaron, we have been discussing some of the ways that the way that you were trained as an artist and some of the codes and rules and procedures that you follow in design and in the crafting of images have certain assumptions behind them. And today I want to focus in a slightly different way on tools. And these tools that we're going to focus on are not physical tools like you would take out of a tool chest, but they're conceptual tools. And the absence of these tools in your conceptual tool chest limits your ability to create works that explore certain ideas and areas and ways of working. So today we're going to focus on irony as a kind of tool in a conceptual tool chest, so that you can begin to explore areas in ways of presenting images that you didn't have access to before. So without this tool, without this concept of irony, if you take a look at the production of your work, the eye that sees things in a particular way, as if the world that it was looking at was somehow completely separate from itself, or perhaps this eye was interested and fascinated with things, but it was incapable of criticism. Irony somehow, and it's not necessarily one of the well-defined features of irony, but irony is a kind of critical eye. And the first use of irony in a kind of the iron was a kind of stock character in a certain kind of Greek theater, and this character belonged to a comedic theater. And there was always a tyrant or a bully or someone who played the part of a kind of perfectionist self-involved, self-important, dominating figure. And this figure was the alazan. And this figure generally held a position of power, but tyrannized, either a local or large community of thinkers. And the alazan's self-importance was usually a fiction, something in his own mind. So this belongs to this stock character of the alazan belongs to a certain personality type. You had asked me about that passage from Psalms. I think it was the 79th Psalm, and it was the first line in that where David asks God to protect the Jewish people from the heathens that had entered the temple. And this certainly isn't an ironic passage, but this idea of the imperfection of the outsider and the contamination of the perfect world. And let's not worry too much about the rest of that particular song, but that particular line, at least, if we could abstract that line right? And heathen, the etymology of heathen is from the word heath, right? So it means like outside, like outsider, like you don't belong. So when you know the border patrol in Texas on horseback attacks the Haitian refugees, they attack them as if they were heathens, don't they? They attack them as if they were these contaminated people from the outside who don't belong. And you know, never mind that Texas was stolen from Mexico, so that it's actually a state of heathens, isn't it? But this attitude, you know, this is really getting off topic, but Victor Turner, the theater scholar and sociologist, describes two psychological functions, and one and they're both, you know, they both have a relationship to you know, community. And one he describes as communitas, and the other he describes as societas. And communitas is this feeling of opening and experience of unity and oneness with the other, with either, you know, a person, another person, or a community, or with nature. And it's a spirit of like feeling a belonging and connection. You could say that it's a sort of primal or archetypal spiritual response to the world as opening and embodiment of what's outside within. And you know, we have these feelings if we, you know, return home. We have these feelings if we go out into the woods and we feel peace. Have these feelings if we make you know, profound connection with people. And he ties this feeling to the psychology of flow that's you know, discussed by that psychiatrist who's not psychiatrist, that psychologist whose name that I can never remember or pronounce, but who has written so extensively on flow and the psychology of the experience of a kind of energy dynamic that belongs to the nature of becoming oneself and one's activities. And this flow that one experiences in communitas is an opening to the world. But then Turner also describes, Victor Turner also describes this closure. And the closure occurs, you know, when we establish, you know, a religion out of a spiritual experience, or we over-tribalize our relationship to our community. So it's a closing off. It's a, you're not one of us. This is us, and you're them, right? So you could say that communitas is the expansive circle that opens the heart to the world, and the societas is the closure of the heart and the refusal to recognize, you know, the other as anything other than a form of contagion or contamination. And, you know, that exists in what's going on at the border in Texas, and it exists what's going on when the Israelis persecute the Palestinians in Israel and other areas of the Middle East. That it's what's going on, at least in that line, that first line in Psalm 79, when, or, you know, I'm not sure what the original Hebrew is, but it certainly exists there in the King James translation of that first line, where the word, you know, heathen is used. And it's why we it's why that we are, you and I are, forbidden to read the Mormon Bible. Remember, I told you that we aren't allowed to read that particular text because that particular text uses words like heathen to describe human beings, and describes certain people in that book as if they didn't belong, to the perfection formulated this way of God. And of course, in this sign, there's a certain amount of irony involved in that idea, because look what happened, Aaron. There's a big gap between the I and the N in that last part, which almost reminds us of another Greek word, doesn't it? Ion. But without getting too much into all of the Greek etymologies involved here, that original idea in Greek drama from which the word irony is derived is the critical I, right? Or the critical character, this figure, this stock character, the Iron, who was imperfect, but in his imperfection, had a certain kind of wisdom, and with this wisdom, he brought down the foolhardy braggart that was, the Alazon, and he always won. And this was, so it was comedy as a kind of theater of the heroism, and as the ultimate triumph of truth over falsehood. Because ideas of perfection are always ideas of societas, and if there's anything that we want to struggle against, it's this idea of closure to our fellow human beings, because that and our fears are largely what keep us from not only growing but have threatened our survival. So let's begin, and with this as a tool, you can begin to make work that demonstrates a critical eye, rather than merely this eye that reaches out into the world and sees things that it likes. It's like, I want to paint this, I want to paint that. Well, behind that eye is an immature notion of subjectivity, right? Because it's only things that you choose to paint, and you have no critical voice in the saying of what these images mean, right? And there's more to drawing. There's more to the eye hand mind relationship than merely seeing the world or merely turning away. So with this eye, this is one tool that expands your psychological understanding of the things that exist in your world and the way that you present them. Okay, so given that, will you read the entirety for us of the Wikipedia definition of irony, and then Aaron, and then we'll go from there.
Classical irony, referring to the origins of irony in ancient Greek comedy and the way classical and medieval rhetoricians delineated the term. Romantic irony, a self-aware and self-critical form of fiction. Cosmic irony, a contrast between the absolute and the relative, the general and the individual, which Hegel expressed by the phrase general irony of the world. Verbal irony, a contradiction between a statement's stated and intended meaning. Situational irony, the disparity of intention and result when the result of an action is contrary to the desired or expected effect. Dramatic irony and tragic irony, a disparity of awareness between an actor and an observer, when words and actions possess significance that the listener or audience understands, but the speaker or character does not. For example, when the character says to another, "I'll see you tomorrow," when the audience, but not the character, knows that the character will die before morning. It is most often used when the author causes a character to speak or act erroneously, out of ignorance of some portion of the truth of which the audience is aware. In tragic irony, the audience knows the character is making a mistake, even as the character is making it. Meta-irony, when an ironic or sarcastic joke is presented under an ironic lens, or being ironic about being ironic, and even meta-ironic statements are ironized. That really seems like a lot of irony to think about a contract in phi through theta.
I agree, Aaron. It does seem like a lot of irony to think about. And, without discouraging you any further, in addition to all of that, most of the irony that's mentioned in the article does relate to verbal or verbal, including textual communication, right? But to words. And when you as a painter draw images, you're already changing that relationship, because you're beginning with a relationship that begins in verbalization, and you're transforming that into images. So the irony of images is a bit different, but the irony of looking, when you think of seeing as a form of speaking rather than seeing as a form of inception, because when you choose an image, you've chosen something in the same way that you choose a word, right? So seeing as a painter is a matter of choice, and this is something that you didn't learn in the code and in the rules and in the grammars. And so choosing a word, and the act of choosing, it's the very intentionality and the choice that allows a relationship to irony or lack of irony to emerge. And so, for example, we've chosen to look at this stop sign, and then we've chosen to have a relationship to its signification, stop. And it says, stop defacing stop signs. But the very act of writing on the stop sign is a defacement of the stop sign. So it has to be ironic, right, Aaron? Because the act of writing this, the performance of writing this, does exactly what it claims to be asking one not to do. So you could say that it's a performative instance of verbal irony in which it enacts its own difference from what it commands, in the same way that the situational irony in the picture with the performative, may have been intentional or unintentional, probably unintentional, mistakes are made. So without worrying too much about all of those, different definitions of irony, let's just begin with the verbal one and work on ways that, we can think about translating the idea of verbal irony into painterly choice and implied irony in painting and in the way that signs are used. Okay, so let's ignore the first part um, of that sign, right? And let's focus on this part. No parking within 300 feet. So one way to capture irony within an image like this is if we could make it clear that the person who put up this sign had no right to put up this sign, right? And only put up this sign so that they could park within 300 feet. That would be an instance of translating verbal irony in a certain way into imagistic irony. There are all kinds of ways to do it. But what we need to do is establish that the relationship, right, between this statement and some relational image within the space of this environment, right, has a kind of discrepancy, and the discrepancy will fall beneath the critical judgment of our eye. We will see it, and our seeing it, in seeing it, we will make our eye will become like an indicator, like a finger pointing, or like a vector that cites an instance of something that's incompatible with either itself or its rules. So if we wanted to go back to the first line of Psalm 79, we would perhaps, point to Jacob or Jacob's stealing of not only, the birthright of his brother, but of stealing, in a way, the blessing from the angel. And we would, call attention to the irony of David's disgust with the heathen and the unworthy and the outsiders and the contaminated in the temple of God that was founded on theft, right? And we would point somehow to that irony. Maybe we could say that we could present this image in a verbal form. We could do it as a meme, and David could be uttering this, and then Jacob could turn around and he could say, "Oh, never mind." That would be one way of doing it, right? Okay, so I want to talk about some of the ways that irony can be used, and I want to talk about the way that it requires interpretation, and that in addition to being an aspect of a critical eye that chooses, reading irony also requires a kind of subtlety of intentionality. In other words, stop defacing stop signs. Where are the limits of the irony when we read it? Where does the implied mirror within a mirror stop? And what is the danger, of failing, to read irony well, and I think we can do that with the lyrics of a song of one of my favorite musicians. We're going to read the lyrics of Vieux Farka Touré and the son of Ali Farquhar, and we're going to talk about the irony there and how we can read it. So how we can read it and interpret it, and so why don't you go ahead and read that for us, the lyrics. This is going to be a translation of the lyrics, and then we'll discuss, why and how it's ironic. Okay.
B-O-R-E-I. Let's be afraid of life, let's be afraid of life, let's be afraid of life because of discrimination amongst people, because of fatal illnesses such as AIDS and malaria, because of natural disasters such as earthquakes and volcanoes, because of the bad behavior of swindlers, violators, terrorists, and kamikazes. Let us be united amongst one another.
Okay, that was great, Aaron. Thank you for that. Now, so let's be afraid of life, let's be afraid of life, let's be afraid of life. And because of the discrimination among people, because of fatal illnesses such as AIDS and malaria, because of natural disasters such as earthquakes and volcanoes, because of the bad behavior of swindlers, violators, terrorists, and kamikazes, let us be united amongst one another. Well, there are actually a lot of different kinds of irony functioning here, but subtly. And it's overall an expression of verbal irony, right? So when Vieux Farquhar is saying, let's be afraid of life, let's be afraid of life, he doesn't mean that. He means just the opposite. We can't be afraid of life. We can't be afraid of life. We can't be afraid of life. And then when he finds rationale for it, because of discrimination among people, well, there is discrimination among people, right? But why is there discrimination among people? It's precisely because people are afraid of life. Isn't that the case? It's like the societas, right? And the demonization and well, let's just use the word that was used in Psalm 79, the heathenization of other human beings, right? And this is what allows us to treat people as if they were anything other than the children of God. And this is what allows us to do these terrible things. And this is what gives rise to fear, is seeing this other one as somehow contaminating our temple or not belonging to our space, or this false perception that we own this space to begin with, and it's that fear. It's the fear of the other. It's the fear of contamination. It's the fear of the heathen. It's the fear of the wild. It's the fear of the city. It's the fear of whatever it is that allows the discrimination. So the irony not only exists verbally, where he's saying the opposite of what he intends to say, but he's pointing to the way that the psychological mechanism of fear, right, gives rise to the production of its own system of values, right? And that's what makes this particular piece more interesting than it might perhaps appear to be if you gave it anything less than a sophisticated close reading, right? Okay, so because of discrimination among people, that's one kind of irony. The irony that the relationship between the fear and the discrimination is out of sync, right? And then let's go on to the second line. Let's be afraid of life because of fatal illnesses such as AIDS and malaria. Well, it's a different kind of irony, isn't it? Because certainly AIDS and malaria are a problem, and certainly there's something that can be done about it. And in fact, people like Vieux Farquhar have taken a lot of steps and done a lot of work in this area. If you even a cursory knowledge of this particular musician and his commitment to social issues, if you just look at his record labels and covers and the information provided on the records themselves, they often point to projects that help the peoples of Africa fight, diseases like this, and refer to places that take donations, and that also work with individuals that are willing to devote their time and energy into fighting against these diseases, because we have science now, don't we? And we have these ways of dealing with illnesses such as AIDS and malaria, and we know that if we get vaccinated against the coronavirus, this saves lives, and this is a thing that we can do. So we don't have to be afraid. We have to take the right steps, right? And that acting like that you don't have a voice in these things, or acting like that you don't have a tool in your toolbox to address the world, and somehow that you're separate from it. And I'm giving you this tool of irony, but there are other kinds of tools, right? That we can utilize to mitigate the fears that exist in our relationship to the outside world, or to take control of those, and utilize our actions in ways that define us. So the irony here is a little bit different than because of discrimination. So the irony in the because of discrimination of people, the discrimination itself, right, comes into being as a result of the fear. So the irony is that let's be afraid because there are these things, when it's in fact fear that gives rise to these things. Now, in this case, because of fatal illnesses such as AIDS and malaria, you could look at it two ways. Well, there's nothing that we can do about this, so it's an act of God. So there would be no reason to be afraid in that way. But in fact, there is something that we can do, and it's only by being afraid and not doing those things, not wearing a mask, or not getting the vaccination because you're afraid to get the vaccination, or because you have this paranoid delusional fear that like somehow that the community of scientists is poisoning you, or you belong to this weird Q religion, or whatever it is that that have no basis in reality, right? Then it's your fear is finding a scapegoat, you could say, right? And you're misrecognizing your relationship to the world. You can't protect yourself from hiding from these things. You have to protect yourself by engaging them and struggling with them. And one of the tools of struggling with AIDS and malaria, right, is science and listening to individuals who have information about how to both stop the spread of these things and how to end such contagions. All right, so let's look at the next one. Because of natural disasters such as earthquakes and volcanoes. Well, in that case, you really don't have any way of controlling. These are true acts of God, aren't they? Or acts of nature if you don't believe in God. So in any case, these are these belong to that realm of cosmic irony. So say one moved away from California to get away from the earthquakes, and then one was swallowed up by the molten lava of a volcano. That, Aaron, would be an example of cosmic irony, wouldn't it? So let's take that scenario and play it out with let's be afraid of life. So let's be afraid of life, and let's move from California, where there are earthquakes, to some place near Mount Vesuvius, or somewhere else, and that have volcanoes. Maybe you move to Hawaii, or maybe you move to Reykjavik, or maybe you there are a lot of places that have volcanoes, right? And they're becoming more active because we have climate change. So let's move from California to Iceland, and then cosmic irony got us, and it's the same thing that Oedipus faces, isn't it? He moves away from his hometown to try to get away from the prophecy that he will murder his father and that he will marry his mother. And it's the very act of moving to a town, because he doesn't know that he's adopted, does he? That causes the fulfillment of this prophecy. So you can't protect yourself against entirely these unknowns in our world, and so the point here is a different relationship to irony than the others. Being afraid of life is not going to make any difference in this instance of cosmic irony. Because of the bad behavior of swindlers, violators, terrorists, and kamikazes. Well, this is the one that I like the best, because it ties irony to the next line, doesn't it? There certainly is bad behavior, right? This is what Trump was always railing against in his discussion of the problems of the border, right? And so he was this like tyrant version of the Alizon, and he was saying that all of these people crossing the border are swindlers, violators, terrorists. All of them are kamikazes, and all of them are pimps, and all of them are gangsters, and all of them are. And he would use these words to describe them, as less than animals. And in fact, displaced people, the largest part of the history of displaced people is that it belongs to this category of people like escaping earthquakes and volcanoes and natural disasters, or it belongs to this category of people escaping tyrannical governments, or governments that violently destroy human life, or it belongs to displaced people who are displaced by economic reasons, that there are crises in the economic conditions that have sustained the lives of them, their lives and the lives of their family members. And because that our resources and jobs are not available, that they seek, to work and to survive, elsewhere. So that there are like these three factors. There's government oppression, there's natural disasters, and there is economic crisis. And all of these are, definitions. And if you look up, the history of human displacement, and you will see that these are the factors, right, that contribute, to this condition. Not people don't come over because they're swindlers, violators, terrorists, and kamikazes, right? So that's a myth, that's an illusion that idea grows out of fear, right, of the other. It grows out of discrimination and this idea of alterity as like this contaminating disease, or like the heathen idea, right? So that very idea is ironic in the statement, but then it's underscored by the next line, which says, "Let us be united amongst one another," right? And so the professed or like surface idea, if you're using like Chomsky's idea of like surface grammar and surface expression, then the surface idea is, if we unite against these others, right? If we have like a stronger border and we unite against these others, like those Haitians that aren't us, even though whatever makes them not like us, I'm not exactly sure what that is, but in some people's minds it might be their color, or in some people's minds it might be the country they come from, or in some people's minds it might be that they have a different religion than us, or in some people's minds. And all of these ideas are ideas of our own fabrication, tribal ideas of like, I'm not this, I'm that. So I'm not, those people, they believe in, and it's not even true that they all do, but whatever. But we always make these generalizations, right? Like, I'm a Jew, and they practice voodoo, so they're heathens. I'm white, and they're black, so they're heathens. I'm from the United States, and they're from Haiti, so they're heathens. I'm this, but they're that, so they're heathens. Or whatever it is. Never mind anything about the fact that this country, insofar as it is a country, I mean, the truth is that insofar as it's not a country, it was stolen to begin with, just like Jacob's birthright, and just like Jacob's blessing from the angel. It was stolen to begin with, and then but one good thing emerged out of it, even though it was stolen, which was that it had in its seed, in its root, in its seedbed, it had an idea of democracy and of the open society. It had an idea that everyone belonged, and that idea was written, very nicely and concisely about the gift of the Statue of Liberty that France gave us at one point. And the idea that if you were tired, and if you were homeless, and that if you were displaced, that you had a place to go, you had a protector, and that this giant lady with her big torch would welcome you and would say, wouldn't say, stop, you can't enter. She would say, welcome. And she wouldn't say, let us be united against one another, would she? She would say, rest here. She would say, you can rest here, you don't have to run anymore. So anyway, Aaron, I think that's a place to begin.